Front and Center. Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Good morning to all of our listeners here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Welcome to another edition of Front and Center, where we put very significant issues affecting our country, the Philippines, as our program title says, Front and Center. On behalf of our colleague Jerome Toledo, I am your host for today, Steph Vicente, joining you all for a 30-minute worth of talk discussing important matters with our government officials, people from the private sector, or even members of the academe. As seen through our video live streaming, you may watch and listen to Front and Center through our Facebook page. Just search Radyo Pilipinas World Service. The same goes for our official YouTube channel. Meanwhile, we also have an audio live streaming thanks to the Evox PBS receiver app. You may download the said app via Google Play Store if you are using an Android phone, or via App Store if you are using an iPhone. For today's edition of Front and Center, we are going to talk about the Philippine electoral system. As we all know, the very first Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao or BARM parliamentary elections will be held this coming October, while the supposedly Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections or BSKE 2025 is being moved to November 2026. After Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. signed Republic Act number 12232. Let me just read what's in the said law. Under RA 12232, subsequent regular BSKE will be held every 4 years thereafter. The said law also provided that the term of office of all elected barangay and SK officials shall be 4 years. No elective barangay official shall serve for more than 3 consecutive terms in the same position. The law also stated that no elective SK official shall serve for more than 1 term in the same position. Voluntarily renunciation of office does not interrupt an elective official's full term of service. The term of office of elected barangay officials and SK members shall commence on the first day of December following their election. The law also stated that incumbent barangay and SK officials will remain in office until their successors are elected and qualified unless removed or suspended for cause. Incumbent barangay officials on their 3rd consecutive term cannot run for the same position in the November 2026 BSKE. In recent times, RA 12232, or basically the postponement of elections, has been the only electoral law being passed. As mentioned in a statement by the Legal Network for Truthful Elections or Lente Philippines, the last substantive electoral law passed to benefit a broad range of election stakeholders was enacted in the year 2016 with the passage of the Election Service Reform Act or ESRA. For the information of our viewers and listeners, ESRA allows for public school teachers opt-out of election service and shielding teachers from political pressures and safeguarding their welfare. Ordinary citizens or non-public school teachers to serve as election staff, and ESRA set selection criteria that will hinder the enlistment of partisan local government employees. With the recently concluded deliberations by the House Committee on Appropriations on the Commission on Elections or COMELEC budget for 2026, Lente Philippines urges the House of Representatives to appoint a chairperson for the Committee on Suffrage and Electoral Reforms who would, and I quote, steer the passage of laws championing the rights of all voters and begin the real work of electoral reform. In this regard, we are now joined by Attorney Ona Caritos, who is the Executive Director of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or Lente Philippines. Attorney Caritos, welcome to Front and Center. This is Steph Vicente of Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Good morning, Steph. Good morning to all our televiewers and viewers all over the world and all over the country.
Attorney Caritos, thank you so much for accepting our invite to have you in our program. Just for a recall, for the 20th Congress, it is Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson who chairs the Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation, while in the House of Representatives, as your organization statement says, the chairmanship of the Committee on Suffrage and Electoral Reforms remains vacant. Why is it crucial at this point to finally appoint a chairperson for the House Committee on Suffrage and Electoral Reforms, and what would be the impact if this post remains vacant?
Well, it's crucial to appoint a chairperson of the committee right now because of the discussion yesterday. There is a momentum to discuss electoral reforms. We see in the current issues right now plaguing our country that there is really a need for electoral reforms for the nation's contributions made by illegal contractors, by vote buying. So there's a need for electoral reforms and there is momentum. And when there's no chairperson of the electoral reforms and people's participation, or the suffrage and electoral reforms at the House level, then nobody would steer the ship or nobody would lead the committee in setting the agenda, presiding over the meeting. So technically, walang trabahong magagawa ang committee if there's no chairperson.
Before we discuss the reforms that were mentioned yesterday and also included in the statement of Lente, what are the current concerns that are now being seen in our electoral system,
Well,
aside from what you
based on
mentioned?
the conversation yesterday, the discussions of the ongoing hearings, not necessarily related to elections, but we saw that there are certain contributions made by corporations. Supposedly, they're not allowed under Omnibus Election Code. Contributions made to candidates in the last elections, and we've seen this problem through the years. And we're really happy on the part of our organization that this issue is being discussed again because we've seen this problem, we've seen this loophole being taken advantage of individuals and organizations with contracts with our government. So under the Omnibus Election Code, Steph, I just want to discuss is corporations are not allowed to make donations or contributions if they have contacts with the government to political parties and candidates. Obviously, because it's conflict of interest. So the loophole that they do or the loophole that they take advantage of is they will make the donation or contribution as individuals. But these individuals are the heads of this corporation. So technically, even though they're not violating the provision, there is still that conflict of interest. So that's one of the pressing amendments that we need right now, that also the officers, the owners of these corporations are also not allowed, should be prohibited under Omnibus Election Code, under election laws, to make donations and contributions to political parties and candidates.
And of course, since you have mentioned that pressing concern, what are the reforms being discussed yesterday that I guess being pushed by the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC?
Well, just like what we mentioned in our statement, the most common election law passed for the past three Congresses is the postponement of barangay NESC elections, the postponement of the BAR regional parliamentary elections. And what COMELEC discussed yesterday was it's high time to increase the spending limit of our candidates, because if you take a look at our election laws, the spending limit set was the spending limit was set 30 years ago. So we all know, Steph, that the 1 peso 30 years ago is no longer the 1 peso.
Yes.
Parang wala nang piso yan eh, if you think about it. And in that hearing yesterday, or the hearing the other day attended by Chairperson Garcia for their budget, he mentioned that the 1 peso is already equivalent to 40 pesos right now. So we know, and it's parang open secret that our candidates and political parties are actually underreporting their expenses because of this unrealistic spending limit that we still have right now in our election legal framework.
So it means that they're, I guess, they're not really forced to underreport, but of course, due to the limits, they have someone somehow done that. All right,
Because they
attorney.
need to ano, because staff they need to underreport, because if they report their two expenses, they will go over the expense limit, and that has two implications under legal framework. First, they will be charged with an election offense, basically a crime, and just like what happened to a governor, a certain governor so many years ago or 12 years ago, he was disqualified in assuming office because he spent over the limit provided in our law. So there are two implications when our candidates really report their expenses. And but because of this unrealistic spending limit that we have right now, they're forced to underreport, or else they will be charged with an election offense and they will be disqualified for going over the limit.
Aside from extending or the limit of the election spending for the, I guess, the future candidates of future elections, what are the other reforms um, that the Commission on Elections push for, which is also supported by your organization?
One simple amendment, Steph, that we could all push for in this new Congress is there's a sentence in our Omnibus Election Code. It's Section 55. It provides that local government units are the ones to provide the office space for COMELEC field offices. And obviously, that's conflict of interest again, right, Steph? Because why would the LGU provide the office space to an agency or to a body which supposedly is the one to be holding or conducting the election? So if you're providing office space to COMELEC field offices, then somehow there's unnecessary dynamics, unnecessary interaction between the local government unit and the COMELEC field offices. So we're pushing also for amendment of that the Section 55 of the Omnibus Election Code. There's really a need to for COMELEC to own its own field offices, or for COMELEC to rent, to have its own money to rent its own space for its field offices. Because if they rely on the local government units, there's really conflict, or there's obviously conflict of interest right there. So we need to work on that. Another reform that was discussed yesterday was on decongesting our voting centers on election day. I don't know if you covered the elections last May, Steph, but one of the
Yes.
main problems, you smile, so probably you've encountered this problem. One of the main problems on election day is congestion, because it can't be avoided, because in every polling station or in every classroom, there's a maximum of 1,000 voters for every machine. And we're using classrooms meant to be used by children, meant to be used by grade school kids, by preschool kids. So here we are on election day, 1,000 adults using classrooms meant to be used by children. So what COMELEC was discussing yesterday was, let us decongest our voting centers on election day by two measures. One is to adopt early voting for vulnerable sectors. So persons with disability, indigenous people, PDLs, or persons deprived of liberty would be allowed to vote in advance, so that the numbers of these vulnerable sectors, they will not contribute to the congestion on election day. Another measure to decongest our voting centers and our polling stations on election day is to expand local absentee voting. And we've seen this measure pass every Congress perennially. But of course, just like what we mentioned in our statement yesterday, Steph, electoral reforms is not a priority of our Congress. So hopefully in this 20th Congress, that would be maybe one of the priority measures that could be adopted by our Congress. The expansion of the local absentee voting, but not the way that we amended local absentee voting in the past. Because what happened in the past, Steph, is the law was amended to include certain sectors. For example, media people,
Yes.
election lawyers. But what we see right now is we should give COMELEC the leeway to, implement the law and just approve the applications of individuals who would want to take advantage of this privilege of local absentee voting. So we would want to open local absentee voting to all individuals, medical professionals, BPO employees who would want to vote vote in advance outside of election day, because this is also another way to decongest our voting centers. So expand the local absentee voting, but expand it to all interested individuals and not limit it to certain sectors of our voting population, because that is the best way, because in case in future elections we don't need to amend again the law to include other sectors. You just have to have an open application for those who are interested to avail of local absentee voting.
I just want to ask this, Attorney Caritos. How does Lente, of course, your organization, collaborate with the Commission on Elections or COMELEC to make sure that our electoral system will be further strengthened given the reforms that you have mentioned?
Well, we always say that the best time to do reform is the year before the conduct of the election. So what we do in Lente is to work closely with our Commission on Elections, with other government agencies, and with other election stakeholders to look at the problems plaguing our elections and to look at ways on how to remedy or how to address this problem. So we do technical work in advance of election day, because we see that when the new Congress is elected, we only have 2 years to pass reforms, and not 3 years, because the last year of this Congress, for example, 2028, they would not have time to pass reforms in our laws, because they would be busy looking and campaigning for the next election, or campaigning for that election year. So we always say in Lente that we have a limited time window to push for reforms after a new Congress elected. So it's just 2 years. So we work on the technical aspect of the reforms closely with the Commission on Elections, with other government agencies, and with our networks. And we do this primarily by monitoring and conducting focus group discussions, key informant interviews. So what we do is to have our reform supported by data, which comes from the hard work, the sweat of our volunteers, not only on election day, but also our volunteers for monitoring the different stages of the electoral cycle, like voter registration, campaign period. So that's how we work with our Commission on Elections and with the other government agencies.
Um, Attorney Caritos, I would just like to get your reaction on this. According to a survey by the Okta Research Group, despite high trust in the results of the most recent elections, which is the 2025 midterm elections last May, prevention of cheating remains the top concern of most Filipinos. The July 12 to 17 survey found that 79% want the COMELEC to prioritize the prevention of cheating in future elections. What is your reaction to this?
Well, that is the right direction that COMELEC should pursue. And we saw in the past two elections, COMELEC actually doing this prioritization of preventing fraud, because when we use the machines, and when we first used the machines last 2010, or we've been using machines for elections for the past 15 years, we saw the problems with dagdag bawas, with manipulating the counting, manipulating the canvassing, really reduced to zero. Uh, Although there's lots of talk, lots of conversations that the results can be manipulated, that it could be hacked, what we see in our random manual audit, because Lente is a part of the random manual audit for the past 2 years, we've actually seen the machines counting correctly the votes, and the servers of the machines canvassing the votes correctly. So the problems that we have traditionally when it comes to counting, canvassing, it's already solved by these machines. And what we saw the past 15 years is the rise of the problem of vote buying, the
Hmm.
rise of the problem of abuse of state resources. And these problems are problems outside of the machine. That's why that survey result is very correct when we say that COMELEC should prioritize solving fraud, because fraud actually happens outside of the machines, particularly vote buying and abuse of state resources. We've been monitoring abuse of state resources for the past three elections, and we saw how prevalent this problem is, just like vote buying. But a lot of people accept abuse of state resources or the use of government resources by the incumbents as an advantage of the incumbent.
Hmm.
No, kahit napakalungkot nun, Steph, people look at it as an advantage, or people look at it as, because they're in office. They're supposed to take advantage, or they're supposed to use these government resources for their advantage. But if you take a look at our omnibus election code, they should not use this government resources, government personnel for their campaign. So, and we saw, just to go back to answering your question, Steph, we saw that COMELEC, through its committee in Contrabigay, headed by Commissioner Maceda, for the past two elections, 2022, 2025 midterm elections, to actually focus on the problem of vote buying and abuse of state resources. I don't know if you remember, but a number of government officials have actually been disqualified because of vote buy and because of abuse of state resources. And just to share our story, because of this renewed focus and effort of our Commission on Elections through the Committee on Contrabigay, we've actually received calls, Steph, in our hotlines of actual candidates asking our hotline if they can do this and that. So candidates are really afraid that they would do something illegal, or that they would do something that would violate any of the provisions of our omnibus election code, and they would be disqualified. So what we're seeing in the past two elections, candidates are more afraid to be disqualified rather than being imprisoned for an election offense. So we hope that this effort of COMELEC to fight vote buying continue continue to the Barn parliamentary elections this October, and continue to the in all succeeding elections, because if they would just abandon, or they would prioritize this fight against vote buying and abuse of state resources, then the survey result you mentioned, Steph, would not be addressed by our Commission on Elections and by other government agencies and other election stakeholders like Lente.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. And before I let you go, Attorney Caritos, what would be your final message to the viewers and listeners of Front and Center, and maybe to the House of Representatives as well, since because of your call for them to finally appoint a chairperson for the Committee on Suffrage and Electoral Reforms? Go ahead, Attorney.
To our televiewers and our viewers, electoral reform is not interesting actually. It's a boring topic, but it's something that would impact our daily lives. It's something that would impact, that we would feel the impact beyond elections. So if you're interested to know more about elections, to know more about electoral reforms, just call us up, send us a message in any of our online platforms, and we'll be glad to extend our assistance, or we'll be glad to have a learning session to our televiewers who are interested to know more about elections and electoral reforms. For our legislators who are members of the House of Representatives, particularly the leadership of the House of Representatives, please, please, please appoint a chairperson now, because the Senate is waiting. They had their first hearing on the problem of political dynasty. So I think it's a very good opportunity, and it's good timing for the House of Representatives to announce it the counterpart of the Electoral Reforms and People's Participation Committee at the House level. Because I think, in my recollection, there are only now three committees left with no chairperson. And the Suffrage Committee, unfortunately, is part of those three committees still with no chairpersons.
And we hope we could hear something from the House later on regarding that. And with that being said, thank you very much again, Attorney Caritos, for gracing our program. Until next time, mabuhay po kayo.
Mabuhay rin kayo, Steph. Marami po salamat.
And we were just joined by Attorney Ona Caritos, who is the Executive Director of the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, or Lente Philippines. And that ends today's edition of Front and Center. We would like to thank our technical staff composed of Sir Milo Jonella, Ma'am Susan Aison, Hiro Lucero, and Justine Osias, who made this program possible. Thank you as well to our production staff and of course to our station manager here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service, Mr. Ray Sampang. Until the next episode of the program Front and Center, on behalf again of our colleague Jerome Toledo, this has been your host Steph Vicente. Good day and stay safe, everyone.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.